Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA Reddit stories. In this Ripestories video, a ridiculous homeowner association that I am not even a part of fined me $500 per day for supposedly violating their bylaws and having a gun range on my private property. Little did they know, I own the forest and I showed them why you never mess with a farmer. And the title story is titled, HOA fined me for my gun range, unaware I own the forest. So I'm a third-generation farmer in a county that used to be entirely agricultural but has slowly been eaten up by suburban sprawl over the last 20 years. I own a nice large piece of active pasture and cropland. The other part of my land is a massive dense old-growth forest that stretches along the entire eastern boundary of my property. Deep inside that forest, I built a private gun range. I didn't just set up some tin cans, I brought in a backhoe and built a massive 20-foot high dirt berm to ensure absolute safety. I have AR-500 steel targets set up at 100, 200 and 500 yards. It's completely legal, fully permitted by the county and miles away from the main highway. My buddies and I go out there on weekends to shoot, and about 4 years ago, the aging dairy farmer who owned the 200-acre plot directly east of my forest passed away. His kids sold the land to a massive corporate developer, and within 2 years that empty pasture was transformed into East Germany Estates, name change for privacy reasons, a luxury high-end subdivision with a very strict HOA. Suddenly, my quiet property line was bordered by 60 backyards belonging to wealthy city transplants who wanted a so-called country lifestyle without actually understanding what living in the country entails. At first, I tried to be a good neighbor. The developer had crammed so many houses into the subdivision that they didn't leave any room for parks or green spaces, and naturally, the new residents started looking at the massive, beautiful forest right behind their houses. People started wandering onto my land. It started with folks walking their golden retrievers, then teenagers hiking, and eventually guys riding ATVs and dirt bikes through my logging trails. And honestly, I had no issue with it at the time. My grandfather always taught me that land is meant to be enjoyed, and as long as they were not dumping trash, leaving gates open or messing with my livestock, I figured there was no harm in letting them use the trails. I was used to sharing the woods. I mean, things were fine for about a year. But then the neighborhood held its first official board election and appointed a woman that I will call Karen as the HOA president. Karen was a retired corporate middle manager who treated the HOA like a dictatorship that she runs. She drove around in a golf cart with a clipboard measuring people's grass and issuing fines if their trash cans were left out 5 minutes too long. I didn't really care because, I didn't live in the East Germany HOA, or so I thought. On a Tuesday afternoon, I was fixing a tractor when I found a thick, certified mail envelope on my property. It had the East Germany HOA logo. I opened it and read the contents in absolute disbelief. It was a formal notice of violation. It stated that I was being fined $500 a day for 2 specific infractions. Number 1, my main barn, which is painted traditional barn red, did not match the community's approved earth tone color palette and was an eyesore. Number 2, I was ordered to immediately cease all discharge of firearms on my property as the noise from my gun range was apparently disturbing the peace and violating community noise ordinances. Attached to the back was an invoice for $1,200 in past due HOA membership dues and initiation fees. Well, I threw the letter in the trash, assuming it was an administrative error by whatever property management company Karen had hired. A week later, I was pulling out of my driveway in my truck when a fancy SUV swerved across the gravel and blocked me in. Out stepped Karen, clipboard in hand, looking furious. And by the way, guys, if you would have received such a letter from an HOA that you are not a part of, how would you have reacted? What would be your course of action? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, let me know where you are watching from today, and don't forget to like the video if you haven't already. Thank you so much. Karen snapped, "You have not responded to my notices," marching up to my window, "and you haven't paid your fines. The late fees are accruing daily." I put the truck in park. "Ma'am, I think you are lost. This is a private farm, I'm no HOA member, and my family has owned this land since the 1940s. Karen scoffed. "That doesn't matter anymore. When the developer bought the adjacent land, they redrew the zoning maps with the county to incorporate everything. Your property falls under our jurisdiction now. You are legally part of the HOA, whether you signed a contract or not. You must pay your dues and you must paint that hideous barn." And for anyone wondering here, no, a developer cannot legally annex your private property into an HOA without your signature and a deed restriction. Karen had completely misunderstood everything. I told her exactly that. I told her to move her car and get off my property before I called the sheriff on her for trespassing. Karen's face turned red and she said, "If you do not comply, I will have the board revoke your access to the community nature preserve." I paused. "The what?" "The woods," she pointed towards my tree line. "The community preserve. If you don't pay your fines, I will have you legally barred from entering the forest." And then it clicked with me. She was completely unaware that I own the forest. Because the developer had advertised beautiful woodland views, Karen genuinely believed the 300 acres of old-growth timber behind their houses belonged to the HOA. "Lady," I said slowly, "that's not a community preserve. I own the forest. I own the fields, I own the gun range, and you are on my land, so move your car." She called me a liar, threatened to put a lien on my house, and peeled out of my driveway. Since Karen wanted to play hardball, I decided the era of being the nice rural neighbor was finally over. The very next morning I drove into town to the farm supply store. I spent $800 on heavy-duty logging chains, cut-proof hardened steel padlocks, and a bulk stack of bright orange private property no trespassing signs. I spent the entire weekend driving the perimeter of my forest. I found every single footpath, every ATV trail, and every clearing that connected my woods to the backyards of the East Germany HOA. I drove steel T-posts into the ground, strung up heavy-duty barbed wire, and chained every single gate I had shut. On the main trail entrance, the one most of the residents used for hiking, I hung a large sign. It read, "Notice, this forest is private property." Due to harassment and illegal fine attempts by the East Germany HOA board and its president, this land is permanently closed to all HOA residents. No more hiking, no ATVs, and no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I banned them from my property entirely, and the fallout was instantaneous. By Monday evening, my phone was ringing off the hook. Normal residents who just wanted to walk their dogs or ride their dirt bikes were furious. Some of them came to my gate to apologize for Karen, begging me to open the trails back up. I felt bad for them, but I held my ground. I told them to take it up with their HOA president. Karen lost her mind though. She realized she had no legal authority over my land, and the entire neighborhood was blaming her for losing access to the woods. Instead of backing down, she escalated. 3 weeks after I locked the gates, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the smell of burning wood and the frantic barking of my dogs. I looked out the window and saw a massive orange glow. Half of my barn was engulfed in flames. I called 911 and sprinted outside with fire extinguishers, but it was too big. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, the eastern half of the barn was completely gutted. Thankfully, my tractors were parked outside and no animals were in that section, but the structural damage was massive. The fire marshal investigated, and he found traces of an accelerant near the back wall right where my property line met the HOA boundary. In short, it was arson. Then a week later, my oldest farm dog, a sweet border collie mix, started vomiting violently and having seizures. I rushed him to the emergency vet and they pumped his stomach and found that he had ingested a massive dose of rat poison. I called the county sheriff and I told them about the fines, the threats, the barn fire and the dog, and the deputies went and knocked on Karen's door. Karen denied everything and played the victim and claimed that I was harassing her. The deputies told me that while I had a strong circumstantial case, they could not arrest a 60-year-old woman for arson and animal cruelty without hard evidence, video footage, or a confession, and I was furious. But I also knew that if the law could not help me immediately, I had other perfectly legal ways to make her life a living hell. I called up 2 of my best friends, guys I grew up with who run a massive commercial livestock operation on the other side of the county, and I explained the situation and made them an offer. I offered to lease them a 50-foot wide strip of my land running exactly parallel to the backyards of the East Germany subdivision for $1 a year. They laughed and immediately agreed. Here's the beautiful thing about agricultural zoning laws in my state. My farm has been zoned for agriculture since the 1940s. I have a grandfathered right to farm exemption. I don't need to apply for new permits to raise livestock, and I am immune to local nuisance ordinances regarding farm smells or noises. Because we already had the zoning, my buddies moved fast. Within 2 weeks, they brought in flatbed trucks loaded with heavy-duty temporary hog panels, and they set up portable shelters and ran a temporary water line. Then they backed up a livestock trailer and unloaded a starter herd of about 60 adult pigs directly onto the property. They positioned the feeding troughs, the mud wallows, and the temporary waste runoff areas exactly 10 feet from the HOA property line, the absolute closest distance legally allowed by the county setback rules. If you have never lived near a pig farm, you cannot comprehend the reality of it. It's not just a farm smell. In the heat of summer, the stench of 60 pigs wallowing in mud and their own waste is a thick physical wall of odor that burns your eyes and clings to your clothes. Furthermore, pigs are incredibly loud. When feeding time happens, the squealing sounds like a horror movie. East Germany estates was instantly transformed into a smelly, noisy nightmare. The wealthy residents could not open their windows anymore, they couldn't use their expensive outdoor kitchens or their swimming pools. The smell permeated everything, property values plummeted overnight, and 2 houses that were in escrow fell through because the buyers showed up for a final walkthrough and started gagging in the driveway. Karen went into a frenzy. She called the police, the county health department, the EPA, and the zoning board. The county health inspector even drove out to my farm. He was a guy that I'd known for 10 years. He checked our lease agreement, looked at the temporary fencing, verified the setback distances, and then smiled. He then drove over to the HOA, stood in front of a mob of furious residents, and officially informed them that my farm was completely within its legal rights. There was absolutely nothing they could do. The neighborhood turned on Karen like a pack of starving wolves. They realized that her insane ego-driven war against the local farmer was the sole reason their multi-million-dollar homes now smelled like manure. They held an emergency board meeting in the streets, people were screaming at her, and they drafted a petition demanding her immediate resignation and a formal apology to me. The total loss of control combined with their hatred of her neighbors finally drove Karen over the edge. It happened on a Tuesday evening. My wife was out near the vegetable garden about 50 yards from the house picking tomatoes, and I was on the porch cleaning my boots, but suddenly I heard rustling in the brush. Karen came marching out of the tree line, trespassing onto our property, and she looked completely unhinged. Her hair was a mess and she was crying hysterically. In her right hand she was holding a small revolver. "You ruined my life!" she screamed at my wife. "You ruined my neighborhood! I'm going to lose my house!" My wife froze, put her hands up and calmly told Karen to drop the gun, but instead Karen raised it and fired. The crack of the gunshot echoed off the barn. My wife screamed, but she didn't get hit. Time stopped and then adrenaline took over. I sprinted off the porch, covering the distance in seconds. Karen was staring at the gun in her hand, shocked by what she had just done, but before she could aim it again, I hit her like a freight train. I tackled her into the dirt, knocking the wind out of her and sending the gun flying. I pinned her face down, jammed my knee into her back, and screamed at my wife to call 911. Thankfully, my wife was able to get her phone out, and the county sheriff deputies arrived, followed by an ambulance. They slapped handcuffs on Karen and dragged her to the cruiser while the paramedics tended to my wife. Karen was arrested on the spot for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, trespassing, and attempted murder. Because Karen was now in custody for a felony, the police easily obtained a search warrant for her home. This is where her arrogance finally caught up with her. In her garage, tucked behind some gardening supplies, investigators found a red plastic gas can that smelled strongly of the specific accelerant used in my bonfire. Even better, the police pulled her digital footprint. A search of her credit card history showed that 2 days before my dog was poisoned, Karen had driven to a hardware store and bought some kind of rat poison from what I understood. And yeah, she did not stand a chance in court. Facing a mountain of evidence, her expensive defense lawyer could not save her. The judge threw the book at her. She was convicted of aggravated assault, arson, and felony animal cruelty. She was sentenced to several years in state prison. With Karen locked up, the East Germany luxury development completely collapsed in on itself. The residents, traumatized by the violence and sick of the drama, held a massive vote. They officially dissolved the HOA entirely. As for us, well, my wife is doing fine now. My dog lived to her cheap for another 3 years, and financially, we came out completely on top. Our property insurance covered the full cost to rebuild the barn immediately, and we built it twice as big. The insurance company's subrogation lawyers are currently tearing through Karen's remaining assets to recoup the payout, meaning she will likely be bankrupt if she ever gets out of prison. Once the HOA was officially disbanded, I called my buddies. They backed their trailers up, loaded the pigs, took down the temporary fencing, and then went home. The smell faded and peace returned to the farm, and I still haven't opened the forest trails back up to the neighborhood. But I still shoot at my gun range every single weekend. And now we will read some interesting news stories from r/FHOA, and the first one starts like this. So my dad is an amateur radio nut and wanted a tall mast. Permanent masts were not allowed per the HOA guidelines, so he bought a 9-foot tall pneumatic US Marine surplus one. It was allegedly portable, so my dad installed it behind the shed where no one could see it. He then painted painted it a nondescript gray color, almost invisible at night and only really visible on a bright blue sky. It was only ever up when in use. Up, however, was 60 feet tall. Obviously, the HOA hated it. It's a huge eyesore that devalues property. The fact that no one noticed him using it for a couple months was lost on the HOA. 98% of the time it was simply down and not visible from off the property. Also lost on the HOA was that my dad and I could take it down, move it and get it up elsewhere in under 10 minutes, meaning it's clearly not a permanent structure. It was allowed, but the HOA were doing HOA things and complaining. The ARRL offered to help fight it, but my dad declined. So what did he do? He painted it white, added a US flag to it, and blared out the Star-Spangled Banner every time the mast went up with a speaker set attached at the top. Eventually, he got a note from the HOA asking him to remove the speakers from his flagpole, which he did. He then got a note asking him again to remove the mast, at which point he sent them back a copy of the last note indicating that per the HOA, it was just a flagpole and thus they had confirmed it was allowed. He even offered to leave it up 24/7 if the HOA wanted, but we never heard back from the HOA in the 5 years before he moved. The next one is another story from the FHOA subreddit. So this is not that drastic and exciting, but when we bought our condo in 2018 before the surge, I was doing quite a bit of renovating since it hadn't been updated since 1987, stayed within the lines and did all my notifications to the board and property manager, start throwing things away in our common area dumpster, and they threatened to fine me. I ask for what and they say, no building materials in the dumpster. So I call our disposal company and inquire, and they flat out tell me they don't care if it's by weight/pickup and we pay a flat fee for this to be emptied twice weekly, so there are no signs on the dumpster or in our rules and registers, so I continue dumping. The BOD president then threatens me that I better listen to him or else. I politely tell him that I'm well within the rules, I've paid my dues on time, and of which include trash disposal. The trash company doesn't charge us more, and I have them willing to put that in writing. He gets all huffy and puffy, and I walk out and he says, "You're gonna regret this." I politely say, "We'll see about that." Well, I don't take well to threats generally, so I enacted my plan, run for the BOD, and get a seat at the table with my best friend. Then elections come and lo and behold, I top the ticket, because it's all politics and I'm good at making friends, whereas the president wasn't very well received. The BOD selected then votes on its roles, and well, I used my highest vote count to suggest the president probably wasn't the best for the role anymore, considering he got the least amount of votes than anyone else currently on the board or me and the newcomer. I got all 5 other members to agree that I was right, and they voted a new member in as president. The now former president was BS, I'm talking 60-plus-year-old guy stomping his feet and gabble, saying this is not fair and we cannot remove him. Well, I just chuckle and say, "So how's it looking now, Dr. Gardner?" Now we've moved him down a few pegs to a peon director versus a role, and he was upset with us. Now I remind him at every quarterly meeting by bringing up past decisions where he chose wrong and used that as examples of how we should not operate in the future. Fast forward 5 years to today, my residents love me because I listen and the old fuds have tolerate me, and I keep topping the ticket. They did add a sign to the dumpster after the fact, but I reminded them that if we find someone else on a false pretense, I'd be sure to let them know. That, and knowing I'm now not a person to mess with, the remainder of the BOD has embraced me and shunned the former president. And the next one is another FHOA story. So for context, I had a larger corner lot with a gravel front yard, SW Desert, and I would spend every weekend pulling any new weeds that I saw. I would still get a letter every couple of weeks saying I had weeds in my yard, and one of the HOA board members lived across the street from me. I would go outside after receiving the letter and search for my alleged weeds. He would come outside with his wife and just stare at me. Both were in their late 70s. Well, I just got to the point where I would go outside and pretend to pull weeds while they watched me, and I regularly went hiking in the desert and went to parks a lot. I started collecting seeds from wild weeds and would drop them in his yard. Every time I would walk my dog past his yard, it quickly became covered in weeds. I made a few complaints then about the weeds in his yard to the HOA, and my letters about weeds suddenly stopped. And now we will read another FHOA story. So my coworker lives in a condo complex and she lives in an end unit that is a 2-story townhome. She decided to remodel her condo with professional contractors. She changed the layout of the kitchen and moved the outside sliding glass door to her side yard about 6 feet to accommodate her upgrades. The outside of the building where the door was re-stuccoed and painted, and you couldn't tell this had been changed. They did a great job. Her HOA found out she moved the door and told her she had to move it back. She started a lawsuit against the HOA and it was taking months. Then she had an idea. The election for HOA president was coming up and she got herself on the ballot. She introduced herself to all her neighbors and brought up several instances where condo owners were punished for dumb reasons. It seems her neighbors were fed up with the nonsense too, so then she is now the HOA president and no longer has to undo her construction. And now another story from r/FHOA. So I lived in an HOA that was so poorly managed that 3 of my neighbors were delinquent. I got divorced and was forced to sell my condo, and when an offer came in, the buyer's bank refused to loan them money because they had a common lending clause that said they will not buy into any association that has more than 15% delinquency. My building had 3 delinquencies out of 17 units, meaning they had roughly 17% delinquency. I could not move out. The HOA refused to forgive or restructure its delinquencies, but also refused to send delinquencies to collections or even contact the delinquent tenants about my issue. They told me, "They're your neighbors, take it up with them yourself." I found out through this process that one of my neighbors owed almost $7,000 in delinquent HOA fees. My association was missing more than $11,000 in delinquent dues. Well, the only way I could solve the issue after delaying my closing date twice was to personally pay off the debt of my least delinquent neighbor, which was around $540, to get my own HOA solvency above 85%. I was in an association that was so mismanaged that no one could join or leave without literally paying the price to the penny of their own mismanagement. And they still charged me $900-some odd in document fees to leave the HOA after I paid off my deadbeat neighbors. I hope my old condo complex is currently crumbling into the pavement. And now the last story from r/FHOA. HOA president came to my front door and threatened to call the police if I came to the HOA meeting he invited me to, because he found out that he spent an hour arguing with me and I was not even the homeowner. My folks are, and they were out of town, he assumed. We got into an argument because I called him what was it? Ah yes, a stupid dumbass for paying the new ISP $500,000 when our old ISP bid $0 because they were about to upgrade their infrastructure in the entire state, including our neighborhood. I have had 3 MB per second for a decade and I was actually hopeful I would get at least 100 now, but no, new ISP had never done residential work and botched the install. They then told everyone we could get our same base speed and would have to pay a minimum of $400 a month to get anything better. We also had $100 tacked onto our dues for it, and guess who went to the HOA meeting that night? Granted, they didn't let me pass the sign-in desk with the management company, and the manager had a note about me already written down, but I made sure that the old president saw me, and after I left and got into my car, the manager kicked over the potted plant holding the door open, slammed the door, and locked it. We started getting letter after letter about violations, and the president would personally drive by our house up to twice a day looking for things to ding us on. Trash cans out 10 minutes after the truck just picked it up. Letter. Bird poop on the mailbox. Letter. Parents brought the RV home to repair on the driveway for a day or two. Letter. Each individual day it was there. My folks shredded every single one. Then we get second letters for ignoring the first ones. They require email response to confirm you've received and understand it. Those went in the shredder too. Eventually my father threatened to have a talk with the president about how he acted on our private property, aka threatening me with the cops via the management company, and lo and behold, the letters ceased. The president didn't reapply for his position the next year. And yeah guys, thanks for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.